let's dig into that in into a little bit
Yeah,
more detail before you move on. So, like, so you're saying if somebody kind of naively they hear, okay, if I, on the Super Data Science podcast, Ritchie Vink said that if I use polars, I'm going to get a 5 to 20x speed up relative to pandas. So then they start using polars and they write code that looks just like their pandas code would have. What you're
yeah,
saying is that in that kind of circumstance, they might not experience the speed ups that we're talking about.
yes. For a few reasons. A, it means they will be they are using the eager API, and an eager API is saying per operation you force polars to materialize a result. Um, and to give a very silly example, if I say to you, um, "Can you get me a coffee from the kitchen and a knife and a fork and a and a
Right,
spoon?"
right.
If you would walk between every operation, it would be very inefficient. If
Yeah,
you would
yeah.
have been a little bit more lazy and just awaited the full list, and then you went to the kitchen, you could have grabbed everything at once. And um, that's sort of similar with a query. If you write a query, if you finish a query before you say, okay, now fetch me the result, the optimizer can inspect that query and can see what you want to do holistically from a holistic approach. It knows what's the data that you will use later. If we see you only use two columns, we're gonna only fetch two columns. If we see you're gonna use a filter later, we're gonna apply this filter before we do the join operations, because then the join operations will be much cheaper. Maybe we can even in Parquet data, maybe we don't even need to download certain amounts of bytes, which can save a huge amount of work. So this all depends. Another one is that in the eager API, in pandas there are a lot of in pandas it's quite normal to use lambdas or to use um, you have the assign, um, and in polars it's um, in Polish you need to use expressions, and expressions are a way for us to understand what you're doing. It allows us to parallelize the work and to optimize the work. And I need some code examples to make this more clear. But in pandas there's a lot of procedural programming. It's not in, and then people will probably say, yeah, but that's not idiomatic pandas anymore. That's pandas from a few years ago. But it's still how a lot of people write pandas. If you say data frame square bracket A, and then you assign a series, and then data frame square bracket B, and then you assign the second series, then you force in between those assignments, you go back to Python. And there is no way we can be parallel, because we have to apply the operation eagerly and have to give the operation back to Python. And if you've written everything in a single context with multiple expressions, then we are allowed to run all those expressions in parallel, um, because we don't have to go back to Python in between. That's sort of the intermezzo here.
Nice. That's great. Let's talk a bit more about that eager versus lazy API in polars. So I love that analogy there with the, going to the kitchen and grabbing different items. So that makes things crystal clear here. When you're doing eager execution, you're executing each item one by one as it's requested. So yeah, like having to walk to the kitchen to go get the cup of coffee, come back to the living room, go to the kitchen, pick up a fork, and so on through all the items that you requested. Whereas with the lazy API, you're like, okay, I'm going to wait to get all of the instructions before anything's executed, and then you can figure out what's the kind of the optimal way of doing all of these requests together. And so in that example, we make one trip to the kitchen, pick up all the items, the coffee, the fork, the knife, the spoon, whatever, and then we come back to the living room. So that's great for understanding the differences between eager and lazy execution. When you are when you're thinking about a data engineer or a data scientist who's using polars for the first time, what advice would you have for them around when they should be doing eager or lazy execution? Because it kind of sounds to me like, oh, you might think, well, I should just always be doing lazy execution if that's always going to be more efficient. But yet, you built an eager API, so there must be reasons why that's useful as well.
Yes. I built an eager API that's almost exactly similar to the lazy API. There was a big requirement because you don't want to you don't want to have two APIs that differ, that don't make sense. Knowledge needs to extrapolate between those APIs. So actually, if you write the eager API, you can actually switch to lazy by just changing the read function to scan, which starts a lazy frame, and then finalizing the whole query with collect often. But the eager API, we made it because we recognize that interactive programming and doing data exploration is valuable to people. People who are in a notebook want to just read the CSV file or read the parquet file and explore what they have. Then they want to do operation I and do that. So it's to the eager API, I would say, is for data exploration, for understanding your data, grooming your data. And when you go into something that needs to run in production or something that needs to run more often than once, I would say take those operations out of a notebook into a script and make a query out of it, and then make it a lazy query. This will save a lot of compute.